Buenas noches. ¿Cómo están todas y todos? Bienvenidos a una masterclass más de Collective Academy. Mi nombre es Jorge Fajardo. Soy el director del programa de Master in Business and Technology y estoy muy feliz de recibirlas y recibirlos a todos ustedes en una edición más de estos eventos que hacemos pues con mucho gusto y con mucho corazón para traerlos a toda la comunidad extendida de Collective Academy. Esta tarde vamos a platicar sobre un tema que no solamente pues está o ha estado en boga durante el último mes por ser el mes de la diversidad e inclusión, sino que realmente es parte intrínseca e importante de la agenda de Collective Academy y de lo que creemos que debe ser parte del proceso de toma de decisiones de una persona, un ejecutivo o ejecutiva de alto impacto, y es la diversidad en el espacio de trabajo. Entonces, pues, muchas gracias por tomar. Voy a hacer lo que hacemos siempre porque es parte de nuestra cultura y de lo que hacemos todos los días, que es comenzar preguntándonos un poquito los porqués de estar aquí. Así que voy a pasarle la palabra a alguna de las personas que veo en la audiencia. Dion, ¿cómo estás? Buenas noches, te veo por ahí. Me gustaría preguntarte, ¿por qué estás aquí hoy? ¿Qué haces?
Gracias. Mi nombre es Dione, estoy en Tampico, Tamaulipas. Y yo en mi trabajo estoy en el área de talento y comunicación organizacional. ¿Sí? Entonces creo que una manera de poder tener todas las tendencias hacia dónde vamos y las bases firmes de cómo ir involucrando hacia la cultura organizacional, pues bueno, para esa parte pues es importante documentarnos y estar enterados. Y pues gracias a una invitación de un compañero que me dio la oportunidad de estar aquí.
Muchísimas gracias, Dione. Bienvenida, buenas noches.
Gracias.
Carlos Álvarez, por ahí te veo. Buenas noches, ¿cómo estás, Charlie? ¿Por qué estás aquí? ¿Por qué no estás viendo Netflix en vez de venir a platicar con nosotros?
Hola, buenas noches. Soy de Reedy. Había asistido a unas clases, bueno, un Career Lab. Me gustó mucho la dinámica y la forma en la que abordan los temas. Y la verdad, en lo personal también este tema se me hace muy interesante. Entonces, pues vengo a seguir aprendiendo, que eso nunca acaba.
Eso, buenísimo, Charlie. Muchas gracias. ¿Cómo estás? Buenas noches. ¿Me escuchas por ahí, René? Te tienes que desmutear.
Ya, discúlpeme, es que sí, tenía el mute y por ahí como que hubo un interlapso. Muy bien, gracias a Dios. Yo soy parte de la comunidad de Collective. Entonces, la verdad, para mí es un honor estarme actualizando en este tipo de temas. Como que, pues, ahora sí que todas las clases que han servido, tarde que temprano sirven. Entonces, qué mejor que estar bien informados.
A la altura de lo que siempre te damos, así que qué bueno que estás regresando.
Sí.
Buenas
Muchas
noches.
gracias, aquí estamos.
Gracias. Andy, hace mucho que no te veía. Andrea, ¿cómo estás? ¿Qué haces por acá? ¿Por qué estás aquí? Sí, ya, ajá.
¿Yo es Andrea?
Sí, tú, Andrea Navarrete.
Hola a todos, buenas tardes. Pues como alguien que es sujeto propio de diversidad en muchos aspectos, yo estoy en una industria, yo soy ingeniera mecánica, me desarrollo en construcción, entonces ya de por sí, a pesar de trabajar para una empresa ahorita europea y todo, con cierto conocimiento, con cierto acercamiento a la parte de la diversidad, pues realmente no existe como tal una cultura y pues en el medio en el que me muevo no pasa mucho. Entonces, ¿qué me gustaría o por qué estoy aquí? Participo en donde estoy trabajando ahorita en el Comité de Diversidad. Para mí es un punto muy valioso y muy importante de toda mi formación académica y profesional. Entonces, pues busco poderme llevar algunas herramientas y algunos puntos clave que pueda yo compartir con mi organización e implementar en mi trabajo diario para mejorar en ese aspecto y para poder compartirlo con el entorno en el que me muevo.
Muchísimas gracias, Andy. Me da mucho gusto verte acá en uno de estos eventos virtuales ahora y esperamos pronto poderlo hacer presencial. Voy a parar ahí para avanzar y estar en tiempos, pero bueno, para todas y todos los que se están conectando con nosotros hoy, nuestras masterclasses pues son eventos donde tratamos de traer a una voz experta en un tema y le damos la oportunidad de pues exponernos y platicar con nosotros a profundidad este tema particular del cual ha trabajado durante mucho tiempo de su vida. Y Jay es una persona que, digo, ahorita Christine se los va a presentar mejor. Yo solamente quiero hacer un par de disclaimers. Antes de eso, creo que vale la pena que hagamos nuestro porqué, como siempre. Para los que no, o quienes no conocen Collective Academy, nosotros somos una neouniversidad y nuestro propósito es conectar a aprendedores con el conocimiento colectivo para revolucionar juntos el futuro. ¿A quienes consideramos aprendedores? Pues como dijo bien Carlos hace un ratito, pues a todos los que tienen esta hambre insaciable de aprender y que deciden después de haber estado todo el día en Zoom todavía conectarse a escuchar una charla o a tener una conversación. Nos parece que es importantísimo identificar a estas personas y conectarlos con este conocimiento colectivo que no es dogmático, que no es pues ni que Collective ni que una universidad diga cómo es, simplemente que hay una persona, un grupo de personas que tienen una postura específica al respecto y con esa postura y con esos aprendizajes y experiencias nosotros también vamos a aprender. ¿Por qué queremos hacerlo? Porque sí creemos fervientemente que hay una oportunidad muy grande de revolucionar sobre todo el futuro de la región en Latinoamérica y queremos empujar, ser este punto de lanza. Las personas que están en nuestra comunidad las definimos como aprendedores y tomadores y tomadoras de decisión de alto potencial. Creemos que en las decisiones de estas personas está el futuro de nuestra región y por ende nos parece extremadamente importante que sus decisiones estén pues sesgadas para bien por toda esta información que es importante compartir. Y dicho lo anterior, pues por eso decía, para nosotros aprendedor son ustedes, son las personas que hoy decidieron tomarse un par de horas para escuchar, reflexionar y aprender una perspectiva distinta. Y pues como está este perrito que me encanta esta imagen, va a haber mucha información que va a fluir el día de hoy. Espero que tomen sus notas. Al final vamos a hacer una sesión de Q&A. De hecho, me parece que Christine ahorita les va a decir cuál es la dinámica. Y antes de avanzar, pues sí quiero presentarles con mucho gusto. Este es mi disclaimer, que es EJ es una persona que conocimos a través de Christine de la Universidad de Chicago y pues Christine nos hizo la propuesta de traerlo, así que esta masterclass espero que todos se sientan cómodos con ello y si no nos avisan por ahí vamos haciendo traducción simultánea, pero será 100% en inglés, ¿cierto, Christine? Ok, entonces...
That's a disclaimer, but I guess we'll give you... EJ will explain why, but if you want to ask questions in Spanish, please feel free. We will translate them to him or he will translate them himself. So everybody, thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm Kristen Barrett. I'm the COO of Collective. I had the honor to work with EJ for several years at University of Chicago in my previous job. And he's the type of guy who will take you to a comedy show when you're 31 weeks pregnant with twins. He's, you know, good people and really spectacular, a good friend among many other things. He's an incredibly impressive professional. He has his undergraduate degree from University of Kansas and his master's from Kellogg Northwestern University. And he spent several years at the Federal Reserve before moving to the Kauffman Foundation, which is the premier organization for research and entrepreneurship, I think, in the world. So while it's not necessarily part of the topics for tonight, he's a phenomenal person to know and understand if you want to understand what makes businesses successful. And we were lucky enough to have him move to Chicago and come on board with us at the University of Chicago, where we have incredibly robust entrepreneurship programs. So I just know that how deeply EJ thinks about this topic and of diversity and inclusion. And I know that he's got a lot to add to the discussion. So I'm excited for him to share a little bit about himself. and a little bit about his thoughts. But most of all, we're really excited to have all of you participate in this conversation. So please do jump in with your questions, put them in the chat. We might have you articulate more or ask you to say more, and we'll try and work them in where it makes sense. And then at the end of the session, we'll have a broader, more open Q&A. So with that, I hand it over to EJ, and thanks so much to all of you for being here tonight, particularly EJ.
Great, thank you so much, Kristen, and thank you to everyone for the opportunity to join you here tonight. No, I'm not. All right, can you see the screen?
Yes.
All right, apologies, I do not know.
Oh.
See if I can get this. All right.
You see where it says
All right.
exit on the right? The third one over will
Yes.
give you full screen.
Gotcha. There we go. All right. So first off, thank you so much for joining me tonight. It's wonderful to see opportunities in this time of like really unknown effects for all of us, and most of them being in the negative, to be able to talk and to speak with so many of you all across Latin America, from here in Chicago. I wish that this is a normal thing for me, but I will admit you guys are a new audience for me, and this is a topic that I have not presented on in a few years. Ironically, this was the first topic and the first issue that I ever dealt with in my professional career, coming out of university. And since that time, I've spent a lot of time implementing and thinking about workplace diversity in a variety of different settings. And so I'm just really excited to enjoy the conversation with you tonight. At a high level, we're going to spend some time getting to know each other a little bit more. It is really hard when you're talking about a subject as sensitive and as nuanced as something like diversity to be doing it in a digital format. And so I'm going to need all of your help to be engaged and to be participating as best you see fit as we go throughout this presentation. I should say I'm also dual parenting, or I should say I'm parenting at the time. So you see me randomly answering a question out of the corner of my screen. That's probably what is happening off screen. All right, after we get to know each other a little bit, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into what diversity in the workplace is, in particular focusing in on some of the different aspects that oftentimes drive adoption of diversity in the workplace initiatives across companies. There's a whole lot of different reasons, and we'll get into that in a few minutes, why diversity and a focus on more increasing diversity in the workplace is something that makes sense for most businesses. All right, with that, just one second. All right. Sorry, I had to cut a piece of pizza. It's really, really exciting food here in the Reedy household tonight. Okay, coming back then to kind of COVID-19, I think that, diversity in the workplace is something that we have not actually seen, or at least I haven't seen being discussed in great deal as this COVID pandemic has begun to evolve. But I actually think there's a huge shifts and huge changes that are happening as it relates to diversity. And I wanted to highlight a couple of those things because oftentimes I don't think they are aspects of work that many of us have thought about. And then, of course, last but not least, want to leave with some, tangible suggestions for implementing different types of improvements in different areas of whatever operations you're overseeing in whatever type of industry, whatever type of company you're working with. So focusing in on interviewing skills and techniques for encouraging diversity, recruiting, and formalizing different structures for the support of diversity-related initiatives. Okay, so I feel like you've already heard a lot about me, and apologies. I caught some of your introductions, but my Spanish is a little bit rusty, so I probably caught about 40%, I'd say, of the content in many regards. So Kristen gave you a little bit of a sense of, some of my background, and the way that I am often introduced, and the way that I think many of us are introduced, is in simplifications. So we get kind of boiled down to different aspects of our life that are oftentimes kind of bleed over from the personal side into the professional. I'm married, I'm a father, I've already disclosed that in one way or another, and I've worked approximately 3 places professionally over the years. But we all know that that the simplifications that we see in our own identities and our own work-life kind of balance, and the way in which our identities are brought about often mask much more complex realities. We're all individuals, with an infinite number of dimensions that sometimes we choose to allow into the workplace, and sometimes we hide. So, if I were at a cocktail party, I might, leave my introduction simply as, I'm married, I'm a father, when, if it were some 20 years ago, I would have said I worked at the Federal Reserve Bank, as Kristen said, in my first role. But the reality is that that starts to mask things that are a lot more complex, and are a lot of things that, as I go throughout my everyday, work life, experience, I'm always kind of constantly figuring out, what do I introduce? How do I introduce it? In what way do I introduce it? And is this a safe environment in which to introduce the subject? On the left, you'll see that I am married. I am also gay, so I am married to another man. Actually got married before moving to Madrid. So the middle picture kind of masks another kind of quiet reality of my background. Well, I've worked for more than 12 years at one corporation. I moved around the globe in that time, and so actually moved to, I think, 6 different times working for the same different corporation with a stint in Europe. And then the aspect of my job as well in fatherhood within the US, I found it interesting over time. I'm obviously white, Caucasian, and my daughter here is African American. And within the US, many assumptions are made when you see kind of a transracial family. And so one of the biggest kind of surprises for my own identity was the fact that after I became a parent, it was actually like a second coming out. Because when you're walking around town as a white male with a young child in Chicago, actually people assume that you're gay. And that was something that I had never kind of gone through and dealt with before. And then lastly, the complexities, really, there is no kind of end to, all of our different dimensions. I am going through a divorce currently, so it is possible to be gay and divorced, figuring out that new realm of civil liberties, something I never certainly expected. Just continued my experiences in Asia, and then brought over the aspect of fatherhood that I never expected, becoming a home parent during these kind of pandemic times. So with that, I just wanted to take a quick second and get to know a little bit more about each of you. Now, I know that I'm going to utilize the kind of chat function here. So what I'd love to see is just, kind of a simplification of your life or your, livelihood and self that you might use to introduce yourself in a workplace setting. So if you could just offer 1 to kind of 3 words, something that's kind of top line that you use as a descriptor of yourself as you're giving background. Okay. Right, so I'm trying to watch this on my phone as well, these pop up. So, all right, so this is great. So advertising professional, teacher, okay. So Jessica, let's come back. I think that was Jessica. Did I catch that right? That was an advertising professional. All right, so Jessica, let's come back to you just for a second. What does it mean when, so what is something else that you're, not sharing when you say something like that you're an advertising professional? What is there another layer that you're not putting there?
Well, yeah, because I work at a advertising agency, and I figured it was easier to say that.
And so is that something that you've done your whole career?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay. And great. And then and just give me a little bit more about yourself. Are you working near where you grew up?
Yeah, well, I live in Mexico City, and I work at this advertising agency, which is recently creating a special committee for diversity. So that's why I came to this, because I'm interested on being part of that group of people, because, well, I wanted to explore with you, what do you think about, like, as I was saying in my message, I don't consider myself as gay, but I live diversity by being a woman. So I think it's important for us women to step up also, and if these type of groups at work are creating, just be part of those, because we also have a lot to say about diversity, So yeah. And about my background, like, I work here in Mexico City. I teach also advertising at Tec de Monterrey, about social media strategies and stuff. I'm single. But
so was there? No, that's great. So thank you so much for that. I guess I was just kind of curious. So like in the workplace setting, is there something that you don't often share kind of about yourself or your background? There's something that is kind of at a second layer. And no worries if not.
Yeah. No, that's my general interest on being here and what I do for a living, and yeah.
Okay, great. All right. Well, so thank you guys so much for coming and for having me here. I hope as we go throughout the presentation that we can start to understand some of the different aspects that we all bring to our workplace. Now, diversity is a topic that is extremely, extremely large, and I do apologize. My kid and my dog are having a dispute in the background. I am going to focus in here for the purposes of our discussion just on the topic of diversity specifically in the workplace. And, that has many different ways in which it, plays out. But, at a high level, it's essentially the concept that people are coming from different racial ethnic backgrounds, different physical abilities, religious beliefs, political beliefs, orientations, heritages, opinions, and different life experiences. So I doubt that there's anything that's all that surprising there, because obviously we're all coming to our place in work, with a different trajectory. So I now like to just pause for a second. I think we're going to go ahead and take a quick poll. We wanted to get a sense of some of the things that your workplaces are doing to support diversity within the workplace. So if you look down, you should see a poll question relating to the different things that you're aware of. So thank you for taking the time to do that.
And full disclosure, there is a limited number of options you're allowed to put into Zoom polls. We can't put everything. It's, I think, 10. So that's part of why you're seeing these ones in particular.
That's great. All right, and Kristen, is there a limit on the amount of time, or how?
No, we can end it whenever you want, EJ.
Okay.
Maybe
so
let a couple more people voting because they're still coming in.
I'm not quite sure how can I vote. Oh yeah, I should.
To be honest, we're told, I just had the team tell me that you're only able to vote for one thing, not multiple. So apologies. That was a lot of the point. So I'm going to end the poll, but it's interesting to see that obviously gender and age are high on the list. Sexual orientation, nationality, some of the highest.
Okay, fantastic. All right, well, I am going to look for each of you to, kind of highlight when something that, I'm saying is a little bit different from what you're seeing in either in Mexico or wherever you're at today. Within the US, I would say that, there's certain types of diversity in the workplace that are fairly codified. And some of these actually come down to aspects of law or legal findings or other aspects of kind of workplace, workplace, rules and activities. So race, age, gender, sexual orientation more recently was actually just enacted or interpreted by the U.S. Supreme Court last month to be a workplace covered aspect that employers could no longer discriminate against. Parenting and elder care responsibilities. In the US, this falls under something called family medical leave. And oftentimes this is an aspect of work which is more talked about in terms of kind of the extremes, when you need to take time off to have a child, or when you need to take leave from a job and come back because of some sort of elder care or other responsibilities. Physical and mental abilities. And now we're getting a little bit more into things that are not as codified within federal law and within interpretation. So things around experience, lifestyle. Is somebody a morning bird? Is somebody staying out late? Do you allow a culture of, different styles and things there? Talents, skills, opinions, all of these things are what I would say are in the slightly blurrier side of the diversity kind of conversation, because there is no real necessarily black and whites in many of these areas. Things like personalities. Very often, I work with startup companies, and one of the things that startups tend to do most frequently that can be troublesome for them is they tend to hire people that are exactly like them. They tend to hire for sameness, for same types of personalities, same types of different aspects of work. Very often, startups are known a little bit for their bro culture, and not exactly, practicing many aspects of diversity. So we're going to cover some of these topics in a little bit more depth, and I'm happy to go into greater detail on any one of them if there are things that are more particularly of interest for you. Now, at a higher level, I started to talk a little bit about startups, but quite frankly, most people don't care about startups. Startups are, can be kind of small potatoes, even though they do tend to be the more common kind of work experience. And so I'm going to present you a little bit of information that's coming more from the big company perspective. But what I can kind of summarize from the startup world is that you basically see about the same things coming out of the big company data as you do out of the startup data. That the more diverse the people are at the table, whether that be in the startup environment or at the corporate level, the better outcomes typically measured in terms of dollars or returns for a company often are. And while I know that those are not the outcomes that many of us might think of when we're thinking about diversity, we think about things that are really at the individual level, people feeling more accepted, people feeling more, happier in their job. Just for ease of simplicity tonight, I'm going to go ahead and stick with these. So, given a little precursor here, and this comes from a McKinsey report that we will link to in the slides for tonight, that looks across, companies to try to understand what is happening, how different ethnic and gender diversity affects the quartile of success for different types of companies. And what you can see in these numbers is that consistently across time and this rather large scale, I think it's close to 1,000 companies that they're taking a look at, gender in the leadership suite shows, higher performance. So pushing companies more towards the top quartile or top percentage of performing companies. And the same goes for ethnic diversity. So companies that were in the bottom quartile in 2017, the difference between those companies in the bottom and the top quartile of diversity performance was 33% when we looked at the data for 2017. So companies increasingly have come to embrace diversity both from a bottom up as well as a top down perspective, because it does tend to drive higher valuations and returns for investors. However, that is definitely not the only reason to do it. When you look across the data at, essentially how different types of leadership look within companies that are low performing, kind of the bottom quartile here in the middle of the screen, you see that amongst bottom performing companies, there's very little diversity within at least from a gender perspective, within the staff and kind of line executive perspective. And as you move towards the top quartile, there's increasing diversity, although we all know that that's still, not representative diversity that we're seeing here. As well, so if you're thinking about it from a perspective of how am I reaching out, how am I engaging with the people that are going to be my employees as I continue to grow a company, as I'm looking to hire. And this is an area that I think is increasingly seen throughout the US and in other locations as an area where people are looking as they're recruiting at the performance of companies. This can come across in many different ways, whether it be the formal policies, whether it's the ways in which people engage with, interviewing and showing respect for diversity in the workforce. And this is something that I think has really been somewhat of a tsunami over the last couple of years. When I stepped back, and I was actually telling Kristen this, I think in getting ready here, I feel like I was a little bit at the edge of this wave. So when I first got when I received my first job offer after college from the Federal Reserve, I've been through this very long process, very rigorous, very formal. The Federal Reserve is incredibly, buttoned up, conservative, organization, oversees the monetary policy for the United States. And, my response back to the human resources professional at the time was, well, I'm gay, is that going to be a problem? I'd like to understand, how I can be my whole self in this job. And, I look back now at like how bold and how, maybe a little naive that might have been at the time. But ultimately, it was how they responded that actually led me to accept that job and to spend time there, because they, didn't bat an eye, helped me to understand how I could tie in from a high-level position into, their workplace and making their workplace a more diverse and inclusive setting. And it was really a phenomenal experience. All right. Okay, so now we've all, probably started thinking about different aspects of diversity. And I apologize. Can you hear my dog in the background? Are you okay? Okay. The COVID-19 pandemic, really is something that is impacting and affecting diversity in ways in which, I've never seen in my professional career. So we think back to all of ourselves, within the workplace, within, kind of the traditional office setting. Kristen and I used to work in a similar office to the one that you might see on the left. And now we think about, our workplace here with, we're all working from home. We're all seeing each other in, kind of summarized small pictures. And everything is much more kind of one-dimensional. So, so I think that a lot of what you're seeing within the kind of COVID-19 workplace is that you're actually seeing diversity being impacted in many, many ways. Some of those are bubbling up in things such as kind of the racial strife that you've seen here in the United States, the riots and the protesting that took place after the killing of George Floyd. That was an incredibly difficult thing to go through in any time, in any workplace, let alone in a virtual workplace. And it's something that has both led, in my opinion, to, I think led to kind of some extremes in some ways. So if you think about it, increasingly, we have a hard time in the digital workplace with things that are nuanced. We have a hard time kind of leaning in. We have a hard time, like nodding, showing respect and understanding. Everything gets kind of, bottled up into very formal interactions that are, oftentimes, simplified. Everyone, most people here are muted. All of this is incredibly weird as we think about addressing both the issues of our own identity and things that we are going through, within the larger kind of world context. For many children and for many schools that are undergoing virtual learning now, aspects of poverty, aspects of difference in terms of wealth and what our homes might look like, have been, kind of pushed forward to the forefront because of the pandemic. And so I think all of this is leading to some real shifts in terms of diversity in the workplace. And personally, one that I expect to see continue to develop is a growing tension between those people that are parents and non-parents within the workplace. Within the US, what I can say at this point is that, personally, I feel like formal policies in this regard are quite frankly kind of ignoring issues that are developing for anyone who is a parent and trying to parent remotely as well as to work. I think we're in a little bit of a setting where many workplaces, everyone's trying to juggle and to be friendly, but it is growing, I'd say, in my experience, in terms of kind of stress and intensity for folks that I've never seen. I've never really seen this tangible stress between parents and non-parents, which is something that I think is going to continue for the foreseeable future. So I'd love to hear more about folks' experience and if there's other aspects related to the pandemic that are specific, but I do want to kind of move more specifically with the time that we've got left into a couple areas to target and to talk about how we can all improve workplace diversity. I think it's important to realize as we talk about this a little bit more that there is no perfection here. There is no perfectly inclusive workplace. Everything that, and wherever you come to today, wherever you're at today, the workplace and the activities that you create tomorrow can be more inclusive, can be, you know, can be different. And this is the type of thing, just because you might be a person of color, you might be gay, you might, you know, have some other kind of recognized aspect of diversity, you're always going to be learning and to be advancing your own understanding here. Personally, I am a parent. I didn't share earlier in the conversation, but I'm also the parent of a transgender child. And so I've been managing during this pandemic my child's transition. At the same time that I'm heightened to kind of issues related to gender identity and what it means to present oneself in a given way and direction. I've also found myself caught by very simple things within my own work environment that are almost embarrassing. So, for example, a new employee had joined that was, you know, fairly gender fluid within our environment and was working in one of our buildings. And about 3 months into their work, we realized that there wasn't a gender neutral bathroom within their workplace. And that was causing a huge amount of anxiety and, you know, uncertainty for this employee in terms of their rights, their expressions, their ability to do their jobs. And that was an example of something that I was dealing with at home and completely missed in my own work setting. And so I say that by means of, you know, always with issues of diversity in the workplace, you're going to find yourself constantly learning, constantly figuring out how you can be more open to diversity and inclusion in different ways. So this is truly a lifelong journey. All right. Interviews. So I wanted to dive into a couple of different topics. We could spend, you know, many you know, hours on different things. But one of the things that most commonly occurs, and I've actually found this most commonly occurring in different parts of the globe. I saw this really happening a lot when I lived in Hong Kong, with some of the expectations and some of the rigidities that people had related to how they asked about people and presented themselves. So if you remember back to when I presented my information, I presented a lot of information which is not the type of information that you should come out and you should ask explicitly when you're beginning an interview. You shouldn't come out and ask somebody, are you a parent? You know, what does that mean? How old are your kids? What is the drop-off time at their school? That's not appropriate for a workplace interview or workplace setting. You shouldn't even ask if somebody is, you know, married or dating, or if somebody offers information that they are married. You know, that's something that they offer, but that's not something that you should continue to pull on the thread and to unwind. What you should focus in on instead are those things that are formally presented in their resume, their formal actions, their formal experiences, the things that can really impact the different types of things that they can do within the professional setting and the work that you're looking to get done. Now, these are very common questions still in many parts of the world. Interviewers often asking around, you know, how old are you? Where do you live? You know, do you have any disabilities or health conditions? all of this information is stuff that should not be a part of your interview strategy or your interview techniques in recruiting, because part of what drawing in a more diverse team relies on is the fact that you begin to focus in on the job that you need to be done, and you need to try to check your own stereotypes about, you know, who should be doing that job. Is this something that you expect, that you've always hired people that are, you know, male for this position? Have you always hired people that were female? You know, all of those things are important to kind of check yourself and your assumptions. And these types of questions are not helpful in the interview process for recruiting and establishing more diverse teams. So you might ask, what can I ask? And I think that oftentimes people feel like there's a lot of things off limits, but in reality, there's very little off limits. Everything that you can focus in on in terms of recruiting, in terms of interviewing, are things related to actual experiences. What was the work? How did it happen? Give me examples, you know, describe responsibilities. All of these things are incredibly helpful in terms of helping to establish a candidate that can come from any background and achieve the types of results that you are looking for. In addition, you know, I know one thing that I've heard is an issue, I think, throughout LATAM, as it is throughout, you know, most of America, is, you know, continuing wage disparities and gender gaps in terms of wages. You know, now within the U.S., it is actually illegal to ask about somebody's salary and their how much they're earning in their previous job. That type of information is often utilized to reinforce and to cause problems, to reinforce kind of the wage gaps. So instead, you can talk about how much you're looking to earn in this position, because that focuses instead not on where people were coming, but where you're trying to go. And so that helps to eliminate some of the common wage disparities and things that can emerge, particularly as women tend to take you know, gap in having family. I myself took paternity leave. You know, I encourage more men to do so, you know, because one of the things that can be most powerful in any diversity conversation is to be utilizing and being part of an unexpected class within the workplace. Okay, networks and recruiting.
I'll throw one out in case anybody wants to add to the chat any great questions they've been asked during interviews. And by great, I mean ridiculous. My favorite was that people, when I moved to Mexico, I did have to explain that my husband is Mexican and that's why we're here. But my favorite that I got was, oh, where did he go to high school? And I was just like, in what universe is this relevant for the job I'm going to do for you? And it's just one of those perpetuating myths of socioeconomic. So, oh, yes, you have one, good. What would you suggest if it would be the correct answer when somebody asks for that information in a job interview? It's really hard. I mean, I hate to say it, part of it depends on how much you want the job, I think. But in good part, I would say, if you can deflect it somewhat, you should. When I was a consultant, we had training around this, and maybe it's an exercise we can try with the group at some point, if you guys are interested. But when a client, for example, asked you how long you've been with the firm or how old you were or whatnot, you'd basically round up. If you had been there 6 months, you'd say, oh, I've been here a few years or something like that, because it wasn't a specific answer, and we were very intentional sometimes about being vague. And it's hard because you don't want to lie, but at the same time, often it's none of their business and it's not relevant to the job you're doing. And so I think that's always the line I'm walking personally, is how do I get through that in a gracious way, but also there's certain information I don't think that I need to share with you. I don't know if that helps answer your question though.
No, and I think that's exactly right, because a lot of times you have to think about, what is the setting? How much time do you want to spend here? And, you know, while you don't want to, like, you know, just give into the question, trying to come up with something that kind of cuts it short and moves on to the other areas. This is something I face all the time, you know, parenting with in a transracial family. I've had a number of incredibly difficult interactions at the grocery store. And it's one of those things where, you know, I don't know what it is about the grocery store, but it seems to open up opportunities for people to ask, you know, largely inappropriate questions, you know, things that you shouldn't ask any parent or any person in that regard. All right, let's go ahead and move on to networks and recruiting. Now, some of the things that, as we're thinking about building out our companies and building out our teams, oftentimes one of the biggest things that we can do from a diversity in the workplace perspective is to target when things are changing within our teams. So, you know, if you've got a team that is, you know, largely homogenous and any one direction, you know, as you're thinking about recruiting for somebody new to that team, I'd really kind of challenge you to think about that as a wonderful opportunity. And here's a couple of ways to think about that. In recruiting, oftentimes it does take intentionality. One of the biggest things that I see you know, institutions, both large and small, fall into when they're recruiting for a position is that there's always a desire to have the person there yesterday. And that's a super dangerous position from a diversity perspective, because it is something that oftentimes leads to the choice of somebody that is a known quantity, somebody that is a convenient candidate, without really thinking about or recruiting for people into that position. So that has a tendency, you know, like many things, all of our networks are going to have different elements that are biased in their ways. You know, I may have, you know, more Kansans in my network because I grew up in Kansas. You know, other people may, lifelong Chicagoans may have more Chicagoans in their network, more males, more females, people of color, you know, whatever the case would be. Quick recruiting, almost always, in my experience, leads to biased recruiting and to essentially reinforce those networks, whatever the kind of hidden aspect of the network is that you might miss. If you take time and you outline what is it needed in this position, what types of roles, what types of responsibilities, what types of experience, are there things that I am including in this position that are really required, and there are things that are nice to have. So one of the things within the US that we're increasingly trying to do with any job is to think about what is the education requirement for this position. There has been an incredible upscaling and movement towards you know, every position requiring a college degree. And that has some positive aspects, and it also has some real negative aspects, particularly for entry-level jobs where people have an opportunity to break into your company and to advance in different ways. So lastly, just in terms of objectivity, scoring and having an intentional score sheet for all recruiting and job-related tasks really does help to take out levels of subjectivity, and in particular help to standardize the types of things that a person is being judged on as you're recruiting across. This is something I saw Kristen, actually learned a lot from Kristen in this regard in her different time. All right, and then formalization. So I know that we heard a couple of comments here from folks that are becoming involved in different aspects of formal workplace diversity support. Oftentimes that comes via clubs or initiatives that are meant to support diversity in the workplace. And so I'm happy to talk more about that in general and kind of my experience there. But in my experience, you know, when you're talking about diversity and diversity within the workplace, it really is important that diversity is being prioritized from the top down. And so whatever your position, wherever you're coming from, that is an objective that you can have as a part of your work plan. And this is something that will oftentimes be limited depending on how incorporated is it into the overall leadership goals of the company. Because it's very hard to affect diversity if you're only doing it from one particular corner, or if you're only trying to do it from a human resources perspective. That doesn't necessarily lead towards a full immersion within diversity. Dedicated staff, like staff within human resources or dedicated staff time, certainly can help, and can help to put in place the processes and the reminders for diversity within the workplace. But those oftentimes cannot be the only places where this can be happening. Tokenization. I'm not sure how this word will come across. It's not a common word within with English, so I'm not sure what the word would be in Spanish. But you can oftentimes
ideas on tokenization, or Sophie. Is there a bit?
No, I'm thinking.
Etiquetar, ¿no? Más o menos.
If anyone has, jump in. But I think it's important to explain. So anybody who has to jump into the chat.
What do you mean about this?
So tokenization is essentially the concept. So, you know, think about it as, okay, so you know that I'm gay now. And it could be that any time that something gay is being discussed in the workplace, you know, believe me, this has happened, you know, any leadership is going to call me. This most typically happens within the US workplace, particularly around issues of race and African Americans in the workplace. I certainly saw this a lot, and a lot of tension around this with the George Floyd kind of protests. Essentially, you know, folks essentially saying, well, you know, because you're Black, you should be involved in the diversity and inclusion initiative. And I was really proud. I actually had a colleague that I approached turn me down to be involved in some of our diversity and inclusion. And, you know, he's somebody that was new to the organization, and was quite frankly worried that he was going to get pigeonholed, or he was going to get only seen as being a part of the diversity and inclusion initiatives instead of doing his job. And so that's entirely something that's within his you know, decision-making power, and is something that I would just say, oftentimes it's better when you're working within diversity and inclusion initiatives to ask for people to come forward versus necessarily just like walking around and saying, oh, you know, you're diverse, you need to be involved in this particular initiative. That doesn't often come across very well. And then it certainly can help when you're actually incentivizing and paying for some of these more formal activities. Most large companies do have you know, different diversity working groups, and those things take a lot of time, and it's incredibly important for the organizations. So it's helpful to be paid. Okay, and then I'm getting close to wrapping up here. Sorry, I feel like I'm running over a little bit, but you know, as a part of this process, you know, I think it's important to realize, you know, I don't know where everyone is at in their own personal journeys, but just realize that, you know, diversity and working towards a more diverse and inclusive workplace is always going to be something that catches you with what's called a blind spot. You know, we all think that, you know, we're doing well until we realize that we're not. And that comes because somebody says something about, oh, actually that phrase, that's offensive to me because of my heritage, you know. You know, that's something that I think I've been seeing increasingly within a workplace setting. Actually had a couple of colleagues kind of call us out on a Zoom last week about something that was, you know, insensitive to Indigenous peoples. And it was something that, you know, had not crossed my mind and completely was insensitive. And, you know, those are the types of things that you have to be humble, you have to realize and to listen why people are saying, you know, expressing their different opinions. And ultimately, it's all a part of an experience to create a more inclusive workplace where you can be more yourself, just as your other colleagues can be more yours. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions. I was not able to follow the chat, so I'm not sure if there's many questions at this point.
Yeah, I have a first question. First of all, thank you for being here with us. This is super insightful.
Of course.
When we think about leadership, and I had this conversation with other leadership teams, especially in Mexico City startup scene, which is just starting to grow, we always think about affirmative action. And there's people pro affirmative action and then people con affirmative action. And I wonder what are your personal thoughts on this, and how do you manage it when the leadership team is like 4 people, 5 people, and really that decision of the next CXO can make a difference in the leadership team diversity?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because it really gets at, the importance that you see in the early stages of a team. So, I think that this is the type of thing that what I would say is, particularly within small groups and particularly within small startups, one of the things that can be most important, early on is to go through some experiences and some exercises to essentially understand what is the perspective that different people are taking as you build out the team, as you start to think about that, because it's really hard when it's particularly hard when you have a candidate in front of you. So say it's, the best, your founder's best friend. All of a sudden, any conversation around the need for more diversity and more diversity of thought and experience within your startup goes out the window, because that's all of a sudden, just incredibly difficult to do and to have. These conversations are really important, and to have as you're building your team, as you're talking about, not necessarily even talking about whatever hire you're at now. It may be helpful to think about having a conversation about the future hires. So what are hires 6, 7, 8? What do those look like? What are the things that we've got within our team? Are there surveys or things that you can do within your team to get feedback around the culture and the workplace? You're still in a small enough team that's probably difficult, but as you start to get to the 10 to 20 size, that starts to become more important. And so that's maybe one piece of advice that I would have. Kristen, I don't know if you want to jump in with anything else, but I do think it is really difficult to have the conversation if there's a candidate already in front of you.
And I think, EJ, to your point, I think that's where something like a scorecard really makes a difference. If you go through and say, okay, we need these 6 skills that are really critical for this job, it starts changing the conversation versus like, oh, this person's a great cultural fit, which is basically code for like, they belong in our fraternity or sorority or whatever it might be, if you will. They belong in our club. And so I think those are the things that always jump out to me. Affirmative action has a really bad rep as like basically saying that you're taking somebody who isn't quite as qualified. I don't think that's actually right. So I don't think diversity and inclusion efforts are telling you to hire somebody who's not quite as qualified as somebody else. I think what they're telling you to do is spend more time in the hiring process so that you see all of the potential candidates and select from those. To me, that's a very different mode of operating than rushing through and saying, oh, we should hire this person because they're diverse, or we should hire this person because they're a good cultural fit. Either one is frankly just coded language for different forms of discrimination.
And I think that's a really important point, because there's so much of this you can have having some intentionality, like so within the US, as an example, there's huge disparities in diversity amongst, engineers and things like that. So one of the things we often start with when we're recruiting for jobs is reaching out to affinity groups for Black women scientists, because we know that no matter what we do in recruiting, there's no way that we're going to reach, as many, qualified scientists as we want to in a diverse pool. And so it's more about spending, we all have limited time, spend some time thinking intentionally, thinking about ways in which, you can reach out as well as receive information or receive candidates. Another great example is, male and female candidates. Oftentimes, male candidates will, will apply for jobs that they're not qualified for when you actually look at, say the work experience, other things like that. And female candidates, to overly stereotype, tend to be more conservative in, the work experience and meeting everything that's in a job description. And so that's the type of example where, sometimes it may take some additional outreach. It may take some additional, meetings to kind of make sure that you're getting a really diverse and qualified pool of candidates. And that's ultimately, where you're going to make the decision and how you're going to find the best candidates to move forward.
I had a very good friend from my MBA program come back and tell me that he was taking the same percentage of women for interviews in a role under him as were coming in the resumes. He was super proud of it. I said, that's not good, because if you go back and look at all the resumes you've been getting, a lot more of the women are actually qualified for the role than the men are, because of just the stats on how women apply for jobs versus men. And it was a fascinating conversation. He went back and did it and said, you're right. So it's worth sort of, I really appreciate that he was totally open to the fact that he might have a bias and didn't understand sort of what he was dealing with. It was a great response to a lousy problem, right?
Yep.
EJ, a question here from Nancy. Thinking about writing job descriptions and requirements, my understanding is that the longer the requirements are for the position, the riskier it becomes to get more confidence versus competence. I think that's exactly what we're talking about in candidates. Can you offer some reflections on how to write inclusive and welcoming job descriptions? And this, I think, relates to another question from Ornella that says, what's the best way to communicate that you're an agency that promotes diversity?
No, I think those are great questions, and I'm not sure that I've got wonderful answers. I think job descriptions are something that I've struggled with over the years. Oftentimes, depending on where what type of hierarchy you live within, job descriptions can kind of be taken out of your hands. So for example, I had a job description last year that I'd written that went through kind of formal HR processes, was slotted into a very, very specific job category, and came out the other side with, roles and responsibilities that, were, not a part of the job, not accurate, off-putting to candidates. And this was an example of a job where we were intentionally trying to be cognizant of the fact that there were technical skills required in the job that could easily limit us to kind of college-only applicants. Yet it was really one of our entry-level positions, and something that we wanted to be intentionally open to, different types of candidates. And so, I think that, job education requirements, that's often an area where we see things get pushed up and up. I'd say, in terms of the types of language and types of requirements that folks have there. I do tend to think that, much like the question asked, the longer the job description, the more confusing it can be for potential candidates. So, while we all would like to fit everything into every role, I think it's important to recognize and to highlight, what are the 50 to 75% of a role that you're trying to capture? Because we all know that when you get into a job, almost everything changes, roles change, responsibilities change in some way or another. So you're looking for kind of directional roles and responsibilities, people that can come in and to accomplish the things that are most important. And then there's a lot of things around the outside that, you might think, are necessary, might not. But the truth is, whatever candidate you hire is going to help to execute and to make that a real position. So I would try to leave off that, 30 to 40% of things that are nice to have, but, quite frankly, leave those to the position to build them out and to make them a reality.
Love it. I apologize. I don't know first name of this. G. Maggie. asks, could you talk about how to promote diversity and inclusion in the workplace when you're not recruiting in day-to-day activities? And particularly, how do you strengthen leadership that is pro-diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, so I think this is something that, this is something that I think we're trying to do, I'd say, in my own current role right now. How do you think about when you're not in a great hiring kind of, period, what do you do? So for us, one of the things that we have tried to do is to kind of revisit what it is we're trying to do in terms of achieving diversity and inclusion. And what we, so I'll just give a couple of examples. One of the things that we're trying to do is to realize that there are aspects of all of our work that can become more diverse and more inclusive in a given period of time. So I run a number of different programs throughout all of our different activities, focused on startups. And so rather than trying to solve and to essentially work on every program at the same time, we're beginning what's called diversity sprints. And so we've had programs and program leads opt in and to say that they're wanting some additional help, they're wanting some additional insight on their particular program and the ways in which they can make it more diverse and more inclusive. So that can be in terms of the types of clients, the types of students that they're working with, the types of judges, the types of content that they're putting in front of their clients, any aspect of their work. We're happy to meet them where they're at and to try to help them kind of moving things down the line. I would say as well, with diversity and inclusion, one of the things that's often, I'd say, missed is that it's diversity and inclusion is treated as, say, a once or twice a year kind of a conversation. So, within the US, it's African American History Month. So, okay, so we're going to celebrate diversity and inclusion and it's going to be top of mind, and then it kind of like falls away. One of the things that can be most impressive and important for actually driving sustained change is for keeping it in the conversation once a month, once a quarter, thinking about things that people can do within their overall work plans. So, for example, right now we're sharing out virtual trainings on diversity once a month. So something that's recommended, not that we're doing, but these are things that are put on by other people all around the world. And those are topics that we recommend, and we're requiring that all staff attend one of these virtual trainings once a quarter. And so that's something that is, meaningful, that people still have choice in, but we're able to, to push out in a virtual setting. And truly, in this particular environment, the breadth of trainings and activities that are being covered and that are available to us are almost staggering. So, it's really wonderful. And sometimes it's best to take advantage of something that someone else is doing. And maybe you have like a small chat group, of, 10 or 20 people that, you're in a small team, watch something that someone else is doing, and then come back and debrief with them afterwards so you can kind of take it home for your organization.
That's awesome, EJ. Thank you. Juan Carlos, you have a really interesting question. Can you share a little bit of background on what you mean and with EJ so that he can address it?
Thank you, Kristen. Yes, well, I think that diversity and inclusion is part of a whole strategy from HR. I just want to know that if you use some theoretical concepts from philosophers on gender studies like Judy Butler or someone else, or someone else's actually.
So Juan Carlos, I have to admit, I don't know Judith Butler's work. Is there anything that you want to share as background for the group so that they understand, I guess, what types of strategies you might mean in the workplace?
Well, I think that the diversity and inclusion is part of an HR strategy. You don't. It should be natural, but at this moment, this is not. Then I think that maybe the HR professionals are should be, I don't know if should is the best word, but should be know something more about gender studies. Gender studies is all about genre, like it's not just only about men and women, but also another kind of genre, not binary. And this kind of concepts that are part of this kind of studies. And one of the best known authors is actually Judy Butler, are in the strategy that you use, EJ?
You know, I don't remember specifically. What I would say in terms of, because I think that's, so there are many fronts of change within diversity in the workplace and in culture. You know, personally, in my own child's like school, I've seen really this gender identity and gender identity aspects kind of play out at an increasingly, you know, younger age. As I work with students and in other workplaces, what we tend to see is that there's incredible generational factors, I'd say, often at play here. So things like gender identity, I think, are newer concepts for, you know, HR professionals, you know, particularly, older than myself, potentially even younger than myself. You know, it's all stuff that I think are fairly new from an overall kind of HR perspective. You know, within the US, that's really exploded, I'd say, in perspective over the last 4 to 5 years. And, you know, I'd say that, you know, what you're seeing is that what we all know is that there are professionals and there are associations and there are, you know, embodiments of, you know, any aspect of all of our work, whether you're accountants or you're a management professional, you know, diversity, human resources, all of those things are similar. There are professionals that do this in an ongoing way. Oftentimes they need to learn and to advance their own aspects of diversity that they know and include within the workplace. And I still think you're seeing that, you know, in a lot of workplaces. Certainly I've seen in my own workplace, but you know, it's something that sometimes is less codified. So those things like gender identity, until recently, particularly within the US, experience I can speak to, you know, those things have not had a lot of codification in terms of importance of how they can be interpreted, you know, things like that. And so there's been somewhat of a hesitancy to delve too deeply within the workplace, but I think you're starting to see that break down. And I think it's really exciting, whether that's in the professional workplace, in school settings and other things like that. But there is a huge amount of change here.
Thank you.
That's great. I think that I've captured most of the questions. Is there anyone else who would like to add, or anything we've missed?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay, please.
Thanks for all the insights. They're really, really good and interesting. I have this question related with the establishment of quotas in organizations. Say 50% of the board needs to be male and 50% female. So for example, the United Nations in their SDGs, they're promoting this not only on organizations in managerial positions, but also in government officials. And I actually agree with this because I think that there's a gap and this is needed and this is something that needs to be addressed. But sometimes I face the counter opinion that say that, okay, so this is supposed to be given to a female person, but this will limit the development of a male person. So I think that we are in this phase where we need to do these actions, but there's these other positions that are saying that this is limiting the other part. So I would like to know what's your take on this point, and like, what do you think?
Sure. So I'd say that these are, you know, obviously kind of difficult topics. One of the things that I would say, in my opinion, is that it's important to think about, wherever you're working or wherever kind of environment or type of business that you're in. It's oftentimes important to think about the goals that we have for our pipeline. So I think that, within different aspects of corporate America, I think there's, increasingly, a drive to have more female representation, people of color on boards, things like that. Those goals, I think, can be incredibly important and meaningful. But a lot of times, one of the things that I see with those goals is that they're not necessarily being enacted alongside things that can necessarily help to create the minor leagues or the pipeline types of activities. So, if every Fortune 500 company says we're going to do this on this date, and it's going to have this, type of impact, there's a mad rush of people for that exactly kind of fit that. In reality, what we need to do is we need to think about how are we growing, aspects of diversity and representation within all levels of our management, within all levels of our, employees, and then the representation that you might have in a formal way, say on a board or something like that, that's a manifestation of who you are. And that's a manifestation of, the type of company and the type of diversity that you have. So I don't know if that I'm explicitly, answering your question here, but it's certainly something that I've seen over the years in different parts of academia and different types of science. There's, a desire to have equality in different ways, but sometimes sometimes there's maybe too much of a focus just on one aspect instead of actually having it all kind of fully intertwined there. So Kristen, anything you would want to add there?
No, I think that's a tough question, but an excellent one. I think that's right. That I like your answer, EJ, around pipeline. I don't think there is a fantastic answer for any of these. I think it might go back a little bit to also Nancy's question around, how do you make job descriptions inviting? Because it all ties together. It's never just one thing. I think often when you're a diverse candidate, it's not one thing. It's the death by 1,000 cuts, if you will. And I don't know if any of you can, you've been through different things that you can relate to that, but it's not one incident necessarily. Sometimes obviously it can be, but often it's just the repeated, it's feeling like you're one of the moles in the whack-a-mole game, and you just keep getting hit over the head with different things that are some form of discrimination. I think that Edgar goes to sort of the pipeline question, and how do you not just address this one position, but how do you address the whole United Nations and how they treat things, right? So I think that captures all of our questions at this point, but I really wanted to say thank you to EJ for his time and a little Zoom applause, if you will. And
oh, wow. I feel like I've not seen
it's a thing. EJ, any parting words or anything you'd like to share as your final thoughts?
No, I mean, I just wanted to thank everyone for taking the time. I know this is, this is exciting stuff, and it can be difficult stuff sometimes. And so as you reflect, I'd say, on these, kind of conversations, just think about your own aspects of, your diversity that, you might be more comfortable, sharing in a workplace that was more inclusive. And, everyone, wherever you're at, there's always opportunity to improve. And these things need not be perfect tomorrow, but, chipping away and continuing to improve. When I started my work, the first thing I did was I wrote a policy for the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City proposing domestic partner benefits. I never would have envisioned that as that policy was shot down and my work was, reviled, that, a mere kind of like 15 years later, gay marriage would become legal and that rights would have advanced so far. So, there oftentimes in diversity work, there are fits and stops, and what may seem like a defeat one day can oftentimes come back to make you stronger the next. So just continue to support each other, and look forward to hearing how things continue to grow.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, everyone. Nice to meet you.
Muchas gracias a todos por conectarse y todas. Ha sido un placer. Christine, muchísimas gracias. EJ, thank you for joining us. We hope we can see you here in Mexico and share with us a presential masterclass or teach something from abroad. We will love it. So thanks for all the perspective you gave us. And if they want to stay in touch with you, how can they find you? Like Instagram, Twitter?
Sure. So just my LinkedIn is probably going to be my best bet right now. I must admit I'm not on Instagram right now, or tweet at Reedy, I believe is my handle, and just EJ Reedy on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Thank you, EJ. Pues gracias a todos. Como dijo Sophie, les compartimos por ahí a los que se conectaron y se registraron la grabación por si quieren revisitarla y una pequeña encuesta. Muchísimas gracias y buenas noches.
Buenas noches a todos. Gracias.